Hello and welcome. I'm Dr. Marcus Papadopoulos, and this is In Good Faith. This show approaches contemporary critical issues in the world from a Christian perspective. And whilst the show will examine issues in all four corners of the world, particular attention will be shown to what is going on in the Western world, because, alas, it is in the Western world where Christianity is under attack. Now, turning to this episode, it is a great honor to have as our guest a retired senior American Army officer who will not only tell us about his career in the American military, but also he will talk to us about his Christian faith, and he will offer his opinion as to what is happening at the moment to Christianity, in particular in the Western world. So, without further ado, let me introduce in America Lieutenant Colonel Harold Knudsen of the US Army. Harold, thank you ever so much for being with us today.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me. It's an honor to be here and speak with you, Marcus.
Thank you again. Thank you ever so much again, Harold. Let me start with the first question. What inspired you to join the American Army?
Well, I had many influences, but the biggest one was my family. And Army recruiters will say that is always the biggest influence that in any generation, why people want to join the military. Now, my parents came over from Europe. My father was from Denmark and my mother from Germany. My father had been in the Danish Army at the end of the Second World War until 1949, before he came over here. And he said that he enjoyed his service as a Danish Army officer in the artillery. That was his branch. And so that, as a small child, that's a huge influence. You're very much influenced by your parents. So I wanted to be like him in that sense. Other relatives on the German side had been in the Second World War and were proud of their service as well. So all of them, and I learned heard of many stories of the service in France from my grandfather and the Russian front and all of that. And so all of these were positive influences on me to seek a career in the profession of arms. And that's the bottom line, I would think, was my biggest influence. But also, it was, to me, an honorable career. It was something, a way to finance going to college, because I went through what's called ROTC over here, our Reserve Officer Training Corps, to get an active duty commission. And I'd say that lastly was, I grew up during the Cold War, and I also felt that I wanted to go into the Army because it was an opportunity to go to Europe and defend Europe against communism. That was another one, another, shall I say, reason, foundational reason as to why I chose the profession of arms.
And Harold, how old were you when you enlisted, and what was the year?
I was 17, 1980. Well, I enlisted early in 1983, and I was 17. I went to basic training. My 18th birthday was in basic training that year. And so the reason for the enlistment was, well, my father had said, you really should know what it's like to be a private before you become an officer. So that was one of the reasons. Going to basic training, I thought would give me a record as a high school kid that was above and beyond other high school kids, not just academics and sports, but having been to basic training in my application to get an ROTC scholarship for college, and it worked. It put me a step above other kids. And so that's when I started. And then I went into, when I got the scholarship, they discharged me from being an enlisted person, and I was a 4-year college cadet until my commissioning in 1987 as a field artillery officer as well.
1983 was quite a year in regard to relations between America and the Soviet Union, because it was in that year when relations between the two superpowers dramatically deteriorated, what with Reagan's evil empire speech, the deployment of American cruise missiles to Western Europe, the Russian shooting down of the South Korean airliner. So that was the year you enlisted. So that's
Yes.
As soon as you said 1983,
Correct.
that I homed in on that.
Yeah. And when I finally got to Europe, actually after you graduate from college, you're commissioned an officer. Then you have to go to what's called a basic course in your branch. So I had to go to Fort Sill, Oklahoma, for the artillery school. And then after that, you end up at you report to your first duty station. I was in a 155 millimeter self-propelled howitzer battalion in a place called Baumholder, Germany. And so, all of this, the Reagan years were still going on. When I got there, he would have another year and a half to go before leaving office at the end of his second term. But, we would all do, we'd go to our general defense position up on the border with the Warsaw Pact forces, and there was still this tenseness that you could just smell in the air and see the wall and the border with all of the fortifications and the wire and all of the barbed wire and all of that, and both sides looking at each other, staring at each other. That went on, until the end of the Cold War. So it was still a very serious thing at the time, and I would say the tension was probably the same going back to the late 1950s, because there were ups and downs with the tension, and then maybe a little more thaw and more tension. But in the 1950s and the 60s and the early 70s, at least until the mid-70s, early 70s, some of the leaders in the Soviet Union did believe that they could defeat the Western powers and bring them under communism. So we felt this was always a possibility, for sure. But yes, you mentioned a few things. I remember in the late 80s, the Pershing missile also was brought over there to equalize the SS, I think they were called the SS-20s that the USSR had. Yeah. Tense time.
It's remarkable, because you experienced in person a pivotal moment.
Yes.
In history.
Yes. After Reagan left office and then the first Bush came in, the Soviet Union began to collapse, but I attribute it more to the things that Reagan had laid, because I believe that his defense spending outmatched what a communist nation could do. But there is also, a lot, when you're over there in Germany, it also becomes apparent that East Germany, of course, stayed essentially in the 1940s, because there was no spending on bringing the nation up to Western standards, for example. Modernity didn't happen. They were left behind. I mean, the factories that employed people were still doing this, cranking out the same sorts of things that you could get in the in the 1940s. I remember somebody telling me that the Leica camera, which was the best camera in the world in the 1940s and in World War II, was the same. They were making the same ones into the 1980s. There was nothing, no new development. They just employed people in that system, and that was it. So the whole system, collapsed because the people, especially in Germany, they could look over the wall and they could see what, the modern Western, free market system was doing for the people on the other side and their cousins and their relatives and their grandkids and whatever, because they were people living in East Germany and they had relatives in the West, and they could only come and visit under certain circumstances, and they were watched, they had to come back and all of that. So I remember living in Heidelberg in 1989, and I met an old lady on the street, and she was visiting from East Germany when it was still the DDR. And, they did that because she was very old and she wasn't going to run away and she would go back. But, no way were young people going to be allowed to do that. By 1990, when the wall came down, was an amazing time in Germany. It came down over a weekend, as I recall. It was everything on the television on Friday night and Saturday was all about, on German television, was all about what was going on up at the border, up at the wall. And then the government was changing hands over, it was like the revolving directory in the French Revolution government. New person every couple of days, it seemed. And then they finally let people go. And Monday morning, when I was driving into Coleman Barracks in Mannheim, Germany, from Heidelberg, down the Autobahn, which I could usually go at a pretty good clip, the whole Autobahn was clogged with little Trabant cars full of 4 people or 5 people from the east that had streamed over the border over the weekend, who were going to stay and meet, maybe for the first time, West German relatives. That was an amazing day, an amazing week when that happened. So.
Yes, indeed. Harold, you mentioned that you specialized in the artillery, and prior to that you mentioned one of your relatives also served in the artillery. Is the fact that one of your relatives having specialized in the artillery, is that what inspired you to also pursue a specialism in artillery?
Yeah. Although I became, as a teenager, I was enamored with the history of the Second World War and a lot of the armor, the panzer commanders of the German military, Guderian, Rommel, many others. I've started reading their books. So my first choice, I think I put down armor as my first choice of branch. When you were a senior in college and a year 4 cadet, you had to put your choices for your branch choices. And you had to take all of the branches and put them in a numerical order. So I put the first one as armor, the second one as field artillery, the third one was infantry, and then whatever all the other ones were, you just had to put them in there, because what they call the branch of sessions people at the time, I don't know what they call them now, but who manage all of the ROTC and the West Point cadets, and the ACS is another source of commissioning. They're going to pick for you where they're going to try and take your requests of your top 3 choices into consideration. Of course, the needs of the Army come before that, but personnel-wise, but they try to accommodate us college kids at the time. So I got my number 2 pick, and I couldn't be more thrilled. My dad thought that was great, being an artilleryman himself. Yeah.
And given that you served in the artillery, you must be very proficient in mathematics.
I don't know that I was. It wasn't my strongest suit in school, in public school, or even college. Although I was all right at it. It wasn't my major, But you go to the artillery school and you're going to learn a specialized application of mathematics, which is applied to things like ballistics. And the Army has all kinds of, at the time, before we had a lot of computerization, they had forms that had been developed, already decades before, and you just filled the numbers in. But you had to understand how to do, all of these things to do what we call to calculated predicted artillery fire, because you have to, we're shooting at something you can't see beyond the horizon. So you're shooting at targets that are far off in the distance, and that has to be done with computational procedures on a grid map, and it has to be perfect. It has to be exact. So yeah, you use mathematics, you use forms of algebra, you use geometry. Geometry obviously is a strong, important part of field artillery gunnery.
Okay, and can you tell us where you saw action? And before you answer that, the gallery has some photographs of you in the various places that you were deployed to. Hopefully, we can see those photographs soon. We have a photograph now. Could you tell us what's happening there?
Yeah, that's later. My first experience was in Desert Storm. This is a few years later. This would be 1994 or 1995 in a training area called Grafenfurt, Germany, which is in Bavaria. And that's one of my howitzer sections. I know people think, a vehicle with a turret on it and a big cannon on there is a tank, but that's a howitzer. The reason it has a turret is so that it protects the crew that are working the gun, just like a tank does. And it can shoot direct fire like a tank, but an artillery piece generally engages at, with indirect fire, obviously an angle, and it can shoot low angle, which might be 45 to 65 degrees, and it can shoot high angle where the gun tube is practically straight up in the air, because it'll put a round, over, say, a terrain feature as large as a mountain. From the battery position to the target position might be 7 or 8 kilometers on the other side of the mountain, and you can do it. You can use it in that configuration. So that's what this is. As a battery commander, there I am, standing there in front of it. The closest to the camera, I guess, as a battery commander, as a captain, in this photograph.
And can you tell us what the exact name is of this piece of artillery?
This was called the M109 Alpha 6, or this was the Alpha 5 version. The chassis and the whole system, the vehicle came out in, I believe, 1959 or 60 was the first version. It had a short barrel. It had been used in the Vietnam War. Some artillery units had them in Vietnam, a few. It was upgraded in the 1970s with a long barrel, which is what you see there. And then in the 1980s, they had more upgrades as well. And this is a 1995 version. Now, some of the vehicles I had were, from the books that came with them, the service manuals. They were originally built in late 1960s, 1972, or a couple of them were, but they'd received a number of upgrades. So today we have the M109 Alpha 6 Paladin is the name of it. They gave it a name, and it's fully computerized and has a little better cannon than this one. But I think it's still the M109 chassis system, which is a little bit, I think, behind the Europeans. I did go to the German artillery school in 1992, and they were bringing in to their force a new, more revolutionary gun called a Panzerhaubitze 2000. So that kind of gun is ahead of this system. But I think the United States is probably going to upgrade, going to come up with a more modern self-propelled howitzer. Oh, we did have one that was going to be called Crusader, but it was horribly expensive, and they killed the program, and they stayed with this one. And that program died, I think, around 2003 or so. But it became a runaway Cadillac system, and Department of Defense at the time was trying to prevent that kind of thing from happening. It was more enriching the industrial military complex and serving the military, the Army, But this system is still a good one. But I'm sure we'll replace it with something more comparable to what Germany has. The British have one called the AS-90, which I think came into the inventory in the British Army probably in the 1990s, which would be superior to this weapon. I'm sure the British still have the AS-90, I think. So the French have a good one as well. So, but yeah, that's the one that I had a battery command on. That's me as a battery commander. It might very well be that same rotation there. That's Grafenwehr training area there in Bavaria. Now that's a firing area. Bavaria is kind of hilly, so you don't see too many hills in the background there, which is a little out of the ordinary, but a flat space there. Yeah.
And I believe we have a photograph of you in the desert, which must have been during Desert Storm. I don't know.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. That's 1991. Probably. Let me think now. That would be right after the hostilities are over in southern Iraq, I think it was, it must have been southern Iraq. Let's see, the ground war was February, and this must have been April or May, and there was nothing going on. We were waiting to. Well, I shouldn't say there was nothing going on. We were occupying. This was outside of Basra, Iraq, somewhere. So we had set up a demarcation line with the coalition forces had with the Iraqi military after the ceasefire. So we were enforcing that for a number of months, and that was in that area. Of course, obviously, there's nothing else than sand there, so that's the way it was. Just a sea of sand, the whole area. Yeah.
And we also have a photograph of you, I believe, receiving an award, perhaps in Germany. I don't know if the gallery.
This was in 1994, and this is in a town called Hasselt, Belgium. And in 1994 was the 50th anniversary of when the Allies came through Belgium. So they were having celebrations, commemorations, all that summer, all that fall. In this particular town, and this weekend, they had one going on there, and my battery was assigned to join the Belgian Army in having a ceremony in the square of the town. And that's me presenting a certificate signed by one of, I guess, the division commanding general. I don't remember anymore, but I was giving that to the mayor of the town of Hasselt. It was a wonderful weekend because all these World War II veterans were there from Belgium, and who served in the Allied armies, and got to meet them. So that's what that event was. So a lot of interaction I had all the time with the European armies in my time in Germany. Yeah.
And finally, we should have a photograph of you with your unit. There we go, in the banner.
Yeah, this is the next day on that same thing. This is in Brussels, and the entire contingent from our division that was, tasked to go to Belgium to do these celebrations. This was the major parade in Brussels. So this was the U.S., part of the U.S. Well, the front of it. There was quite a few of us there, several hundred. The British Army was there. Was the Royal Guard from the who does who guard the palace, they were there in their red and with the bearskin caps. The Belgian army was there. Some people from, some troops from the French army, and I mean, the whole thing must have been many miles long as we went through the main area, the downtown areas in Belgium. I don't remember who took this picture, but somehow they gave it to me and thought it was a good one to send along in the old Class A uniform that we had.
One question which has just entered my mind. It was towards the end of 1994 that the Russian army left Germany, which was a great humiliation for the Russian people and something that hurt them tremendously. Given that you were in Germany at that time, did you ever meet any Russian officers, any Russian soldiers in general?
Not in Germany. I should have sent some pictures. Now, in late 1995, I went to Bosnia to be part with the whole First Armored Division went down there to be part of this NATO group, and the Russians were invited. So there were Russians there. They had a brigade level sector. As I remember, there was a U.S. brigade, I think a whole Russian brigade in a certain area, French brigade, a British brigade, and then there was multinational units everywhere. Because then I was parsed out. I was just in a handful of Americans sent over to a Scandinavian brigade as an artillery liaison cell, and I stayed there for almost a whole year under the Scandinavian armies. But I did see Russians on occasion in certain areas, and I think we had some interaction with them. I just don't remember exactly, because it was all these different nations. You'd see different people on every single day, so
yes,
can't remember it all. Yeah.
Okay, and can you tell us in what year you were made Lieutenant Colonel?
I was promoted to Lieutenant Colonel in 2000 and four. I think was my promotion.
2004.
Yeah, I believe so. Yeah.
And all in all, how long did you serve as a soldier for?
Just under a few days short of a full 25 years. Now, that's commissioned service. I came in '83 as a enlisted man, and then when you go into ROTC, that does not count toward your commissioned service because you're not a commissioned officer. So you're a cadet. So the clock started for me in 1987. So actually, yeah. So, but it was. I think at my my out processing appointment or something, they said you completed 24 years, 11 months, 3 weeks, and something like that. So almost 25 full years of active duty service. Yeah.
Okay. Moving on. Now, we've known each other for a few years now, so I'm aware that you're a Christian. But can you tell our audience, did you grow up in a Christian family?
Certainly. Yes. My parents my mother came from obviously a Protestant part of Germany. Well, I think there were Catholics there too. So, it was like one village would have a Catholic church, another village had a Protestant church. So that part of Germany, Rhineland-Pfalz, was, I don't know if it was 50-50. Like Bavaria is almost 100% Catholic. The states in northern Germany are almost 100% Protestant. So,
yes.
When you're in the middle of the country, Mason-Dixon line, if you will, if there is such a thing there, you're more divided 50-50 or 40-60, depending on how far north or south you are. But my mother, was, Martin Luther was the one who began the Reformation. And so I think the brand of Christianity in Germany is largely Lutheran. and in Denmark too. The Denmark, I would say, is almost all Protestant. There are some Catholics, I think, but for the most part, it's Protestant. So yeah, and I was baptized as an infant. I was born in Chicago, Illinois, so I was baptized as a baby, and we went. I went to church as soon as well. We had Sunday school, where you learn about Jesus Christ and all of that. But, they don't try not to have little kids in the service. So the churches here often have Sunday school where a church elder teaches them about Christianity and Jesus and everything that you need to know. And then when you're a teenager, we have what's called confirmation school or confirmation class, and that you usually go to your church after the end of the day at public school, and you do that for about a year before you're confirmed. And you're generally confirmed, I think, at age 14 over here. At least that's what I remember in our denomination. So, and then of course the pastor expects you to attend, church service regularly as an adult, and he, told us many things about what is expected of a Christian, and he thought that was, one of the things. And I remember he always said, going to church does not necessarily make you a Christian, but going to church is where you will hear the scripture, and you need to hear the scripture as a Christian, because we pastors or priests in the Catholic denomination or in the Orthodox, they spend their lives getting the education, going to theology school, college, whatever, to become a pastor or a priest. So they are trained to teach it, and it's a good place. Church is therefore a good place to hear the scripture, to hear a sermon, and to think. He said, our pastor said, and it's a good place to think about what it means to be a Christian while you're in the middle of a service, which is a combination of ceremony, a combination of scripture, a combination of a sermon maybe that can be applied to your life, and things that happen to people in life, and all of that. It's a bringing together of these many things. There's camaraderie among Christians. So it's many things, I would think, multi-layered.
Just as a side point, I'm a quarter German, and my German family were from Bavaria, in particular a town called Straubing and a village called Hadersbach, and they were all Catholic, because as you said, Bavaria is almost entirely Catholic.
Yes.
I think it's the heartland of Catholicism in Germany.
Right.
And my German relatives, they were quite pious Catholics.
Yes.
So that's something that didn't sit quite well with Otto von Bismarck being a Protestant, but that's obviously another story. Harold, in regard to the American Army, when you were serving in it, did Christianity have a strong presence in it? Because I'm under the impression it did, but can you confirm that?
When I came in, it certainly did. Every post, we call bases a post in the Army, has a chapel. If it's a big post, there'll be several of them. One of the branches, just like my branch is field artillery, one of the branches for officers is the chaplain branch. And that's been around just as long as the other ones, from the start of the Continental Army back in the 1700s. So, yeah, I mean, officers that become a chaplain, they have to graduate from college. They have to go to one of the, accredited seminaries. And then the Army, of course, has to have enough of them from all the denominations, so that they can spread them around in case they need certain, services to be done. So, for example, like, I work at right now. I work at Fort Belvoir, Virginia, as a contractor, and I drive by one of the post chapels every day to the building I go to, and there'll always be something on the marquee outside saying, Catholic service, whatever, twice a week, these 2 days, these hours, Protestant service, general. One of them was general non-denominational Christian service. All of the Army chaplains have to be able to conduct services that are kind of, Christian. They're Christian, but they're not particular to, excuse me, to any particular one, because there is that sort of flavor as well. That in a way kind of goes back to, the first 100 or first 2-3 centuries of early Christianity, because there were no denominations then. They were just, the first 100 years after Christ, there was no, the word Christianity didn't exist either, but they called us Christ followers, and so before, in those centuries, that would be sort of a form of general, Christianity, I suppose, before the term. So they have that, but back to the Army, there are plenty of resources to go and see a chaplain, a battalion, a brigade, a division. They all have a chaplain assigned to them. So if you need to go see a chaplain, and they all hold services, so it's a resource, it's an asset. They're there. An
inevitable question I have, and no doubt many of our viewers will also be thinking about this: what is the state of Christianity today in not just in the US Army, but in the other 2 branches, the Air Force and the Navy?
Well, to my knowledge, they're the same. The Army, the Academy at West Point has a huge cathedral where they held the services. There's a huge modernistic-looking one at the Air Force Academy in Colorado. The Navy in Annapolis, Maryland, same thing. So, I don't know if everybody who all the cadets and all these services are as I don't know if they're as strict, holding themselves to the same level of being a fervent, Christian as maybe my generation or your relatives in Bavaria, for example. Maybe not, but then there are a lot of, in America, there are a lot of Christians who are who live it and breathe it and talk it and think it all day long. I would say they're very dedicated and fervent Christians.
I asked the question, and I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself now, but we're all aware that cancerous ideology, if we can use the word ideology, of woke has eroded a great deal, not just in America, not just in Britain, but across the Western world. So that's why I ask, has it had a detrimental impact in the American military? Because obviously it is anti-Christian in nature.
Yeah, anti-Christianism, I call it anti-Christianism. We've had anti-Christianism for centuries in various forms. I would say that the French Revolution was the first, big start of it in recent times. I consider the 1800s, the 1700s and till today somewhat recent time in the history of Christianity. So, the French Revolution, the Jacobins, who were anti-Christianists, they were trying to get rid of Christianity in France, and as they were slaughtering, they killed the king and murdering the nobility. They were doing the same to the clergy in France. And I would say that those people some of them were like the proto, I would call them proto communists. In the mid 1800s, you had Karl Marx starting with communism, bringing that into the world. His message was certainly, Communist Manifesto was certainly anti-Christianist, and they, people like him, and especially the Jewish communists in Russia had been essentially trying to undermine and destroy the royal family. They killed the Tsar in 1881. Alexander, I think it was, and then Nicholas in 1917, and plunged the nation into communism and decreed atheism. So that was another big part of a huge attack on part of Christendom, which it continues. Now, we were successful in defeating communism during the Cold War. We won the Cold War and really, I would say, freed Russia of communism because they threw it off. And now they're not communist anymore, I would say. And the churches have come back to Russia. And so, but in our own Western nations, there are communists amongst us. Unlike it was in the 1950s and 60s and 70s and before, when we made sure we went after them and even jailed them and threw them in prison, where I think communists belong. But now they're out there, and they may wear a different cloak, may not necessarily call themselves that, but they're out there looking to destroy Christianity, and there are examples of it every day. There's some organization run by some guy claims he's an atheist called the Freedom from Religion Society or something, and he constantly brings lawsuits against the Army for having nativity scenes. Like, at Fort Belvoir, Virginia, there was a nativity scene this Christmas, and there have been every year. I've been there the last couple of years, on the lawn in front of the chapel. And these guys say that those sorts of things are a violation of the so-called separation of church and state. Well, there is no separation of church and state. So that's one of the ways the anti-Christianists wage war on us. They use the courts, they use the media, they use politicians that they have, that they're in their pockets. So that's what's happening to us in the West. Even though we defeated the formal communism of the Soviet Union, it's still around, and it's insidious, and it tries to dig into everything, and warp minds and undermine the next generation, to be against Christianity. I think so. It's out there. And it has to be guarded against, has to be watched.
So you believe that Christianity is under attack in the Western world, for example, in America and in Britain?
Yes. Definitely.
Yes. Because we see in Britain, at present, there is a Christian revival, which I'm absolutely delighted about. But for decades, Christianity has been eroded here, and I would argue, as I have done for many years now, it's been eroded by the British state. I mean, yes, communism is atheist, but if you take the monarchy in Britain, that's not communist. And yet the Queen, Elizabeth II, she's supposed to be that she was the defender of the faith, and yet she never expressed even sadness or regret at the decline of Christianity.
Yeah, well, it makes you wonder.
Sorry.
It makes you wonder, with regards to your royal family, are they being controlled by somebody else?
Well, it's interesting because her son, Charles III, again, he's the defender of the faith, which I think is laughable, but he does nothing for Christianity.
Right.
Now, they're clearly not communists. The British aristocracy is clearly not communist, yet they are attacking the religion of the British people. When I say the British people, you know what I mean. I mean the British people, the English, the Scottish, the Welsh,
Right.
and the Irish. But it's interesting what you say about the British royal family, because Ian Smith, the former leader of Rhodesia, who I consider to have been a wonderful politician, a heroic politician, he observed in the late 1960s, early 1970s, that, and you can read it in his autobiography, that the British state, including the monarchy, had gone to war against its own people. And one of its first victims were the British community in Rhodesia. Now, he didn't, in his autobiography, speculate as to what has happened with the British royal family, but I don't know how it was before 1945. I mean, officially, we're told the royal family was pious. Maybe, I don't know. But definitely after 1945, you see the British state, it starts to change. It starts to change very rapidly. Also, as well, Enoch Powell, he observed, again, in the late 1960s, early 1970s, that something has gone terribly, terribly wrong in Britain. And it goes to the very heart of the British state, which, of course, is the monarchy and the aristocracy. So, as I say, on the one hand, there is a Christian revival now in Britain, which...
But that's probably among the people, not the people not among the royal family.
Yes, absolutely. Sorry, I should have clarified that. Absolutely, amongst ordinary Britons. All we see today from the British royal family or the British aristocracy is no reference to the attacks on Christianity in Britain or in America or in Australia, the other parts of the kingdom. I don't know if you know this, Harold, but at the end of last year, Canterbury Cathedral permitted graffiti on its walls, on its internal walls, for the sake of, quote, diversity. What do you think about that? Because to me, that is a desecration of a Christian temple.
Right. There is no diversity. There is that Jesus Christ said, "I am the way to the Father." There is no other way. Now, some of this also may come from some of these recent popes. Some of them have said things like, I know that the Pope who just passed away, I think he made a comment a few years ago saying that there are many paths to God, not according to Jesus. Now he's supposed to be the head top guy defending the faith in the Catholic denomination, right? Yes. But he's saying something that's blasphemous, I would say. Yes. I mean, what would Jesus would admonish him? Because he said, "I am the only way to the Father, to the Creator," whatever you want to call him. There is no other way. So there should, in a Christian land, Britain is a Christian country. There shouldn't be any tolerance for anything else. That's it. And I'm all for, other religions in other countries being the same way. I don't have any reason to think that we should, promulgate Christianity among other peoples who don't want to accept it. Certainly not forcefully, not at all. I know you want to talk about this in a minute or two. The book I wrote about this founding father, there are some things in there about Christianity at the time and Christians being attacked and made Christian slaves by the Barbary pirates. And I have an aside, a little mini essay in the book where one of the Americans was captured and kept in a dungeon in one of the Barbary state cities there in North Africa. And he was talking to one of his captors who was a Muslim, and they were talking about the differences of Christianity and Islam, and they were trying to get him to convert, and he said, "I won't do it. You know, you can torture me and keep me in here the rest of my life, but I won't leave Christ." And he said, "The difference between us is our religion comes into the world through love. Yours is promulgated by the sword." You know, so there were these differences that showed that certain religions are doing it by force, but Christianity doesn't do it by force. It does it by, Christianity is about, one of the things it's about is atonement, the staying, repentance, staying away, atoning for sin and staying away from it, not, brutal subjugation of peoples and genocide.
It's an interesting observation, because it kind of connects to what I wanted to say now concerning the Church of England. And I say this as someone who is also part English, and as a baby I was baptized in the Church of England. But I believe, and I think it's irrefutable, and many other English people believe this, that today there is nothing remotely Christian about the Church of England. For example, it teaches that there is no hell, that God and Jesus would never allow someone to go to hell. Well, that is clearly putting out, in my opinion, I don't know what your thought is, that is clearly putting out false Christianity. Because if there's a heaven, there has to be a hell. And if there's a God, there has to be Satan. And throughout the Bible, the Old Testament and the New Testament, heaven and hell is spoken about. And only God will decide if you go to heaven or you go to hell. But the Church of England, and from what I can gather since the 1960s, has been saying something very different. And there's always silence from the Church of England when there are clear attacks on Christianity, be it in words or violence. So, for example, the start of the Paris Olympics in 2024, where the Last Supper was mocked, hideously mocked. Not one word of condemnation for the Church of England. Interesting that you bring up about other religions and your respect for people's rights to follow another religion. The only country that condemned that was the Iranian government. And yet, here we are in the Western world, not one Western government said anything about that. Now,
what does that tell you? It tells you those people are controlled and brainwashed and programmed by their handlers and by these multi-billionaire types who are trying to make this happen.
They have
that's
to be.
Who owns them, and that's probably who has owned and controlled the royal family probably at least since the Second World War. At least,
yes.
I think that's true. I mean, who really controls England? I would say the number one name that comes up is Rothschild. That's probably the main, and then his cabal of the same sort of people. But there's probably a hierarchy among these ultra wealthy, But they are the ones, who is the one who bought Winston Churchill? And Winston Churchill was not particularly talking about going to war with Germany when he first became a politician. But at one point, he was broke, and then he was paid off by, I forget the guy's name, but it's in, author David Irving, historian David Irving talks about this in one of his volumes on Churchill. And from that point forward, he was controlled, and he brought Britain to war against Hitler's Germany. It wasn't Germany that declared war on Britain. It was Britain declared war on Germany. So those people are the ones who control the elites in Britain, and they still do. Just it's another generation.
There's a lot of myths circulating since the Second World War about Churchill, and I find it a matter of inversion because he was clearly pro-war, whereas Chamberlain and Chamberlain's Foreign Secretary, Lord Halifax, were anti-war, and yet they're demonized, and yet someone who's pro-war is, is presented as almost godlike. Yet, in the summer of 1945, there was a general election held in Britain, and Churchill lost by a landslide. What does that tell you about how the British people viewed Churchill? They clearly didn't view
usefulness was at end.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. And you mentioned about the British royal family. The British royal family and the British aristocracy have for centuries had connections with forces which, in my opinion, jeopardize Britain's independence and sovereignty. And I don't want to digress now, but I don't believe the British royal family and the British aristocracy have ever had loyalty to the British people. If you consider the so-called British national anthem, well, it's an anthem for the monarch. Nowhere is Britain or the British people mentioned. And when a member of the British royal family dies, what flag is on their casket, draped on their casket? The Union flag or the royal flag? It's the royal flag.
Right.
So but I think, to be fair to that, applies to Europe's royal families as a whole. I don't think the Spanish royal family have any loyalty or love to the Spanish family. Spain is still a monarchy today, and look at the terrible problems in Spain today. And yet the Spanish royal family says nothing about the decline of Christianity in Spain. But I must return now to the focus of our interview. It's a fascinating discussion. Maybe we can discuss this another time in an interview, if you'd be happy to come back. Harold, you are an author of 2 books. Can you tell our audience about these 2 books, please?
Yes, my first one is about Confederate General James Longstreet. He was a Corps commander under Robert E. Lee in the Army of Northern Virginia. And I became interested in him because he was, most of the mainstream historiography on him going back to the end of the years after the war, well into the 20th century, was fairly negative on him. And he fell out of favor of what you might call the lost cause kind of narratives. I'm sure your audience it knows what that is. And a lot of that was propaganda, of course. Now, when I went into the Army, and another thing you have to do as an Army officer, you have to be pretty familiar with and be a good student, a constant student of military history. And so when I started looking at him particularly, I started to realize, now knowing my craft and my profession, that a lot of these narratives they were totally wrong with regards to the conduct of the things that he did militarily. And I thought he was way ahead of his time. And so that's what I wrote about. It was a kind of an analysis. The book is an analysis of why what he did in the war on a large scale was, modern thinking. Was the title of the book is James Longstreet in the American Civil War, the Confederate general who fought the next war, why he was fighting, the next war. Now, he didn't, he wasn't alive in World War I or World War II, but some of the things he did were forerunner to what became method of war in the future. My next one, just published in 2025, is about a founding father named Fisher Ames. It's kind of along the lines of what we're talking about here. Fisher Ames, Christian founding father and Federalist. He was of the Federalist Party. And the reason for my title is exactly what we're talking about. There are a lot of the narratives today are anti-Christianist, and a lot of people over here have been trained and led to believe and brainwashed to think that the founding fathers were not Christians. They were atheists, or they were agnostics, or they were deists, or or something else. And that isn't true at all. And so I wanted to have a title that, stamps right on top, that flies right in the face of these non-truths about this man. Fisher Ames is the one who framed the words for what are often termed today our religious clauses in the First Amendment. That was one of the big things he did, and nobody knows about it. It's been buried, and I want to bring that forward. And and he was a great orator, well liked, loved by President Washington and Alexander Hamilton. So that's my second work there. So yes, those are the two.
And finally, Harold, how can our audience find out more about you, your work, and in particular your two books?
I don't have a website about myself, but the publisher for the Civil War general book is Savas Beatty. You can find the book on that website. It's Savas-Beatty. The book is on Amazon and Barnes and Noble. It's in 4 formats, and one of them is an audio book done by a really good voice artist, and that's becoming even more popular than the print version for some reason. So you can find it there. There are a number of my talks on YouTube, and maybe the one with the best audio is the UK Civil War Roundtable that I spoke to, 3 years ago, is on YouTube. Very clear, good sound quality, so you can hear me talk about it there. I would recommend people go look at that if they want to, see what I have to say about some of the book. Now, I don't cover the whole book in 45 minutes or an hour or whatever it is, but it's there. Fisher Ames is just starting out, so I did do a PowerPoint presentation which I put on YouTube. It runs an hour and 45 minutes. People can go look at that as well. But I think it's going to take some time for this unknown founding father to become more known. So I'm doing talks and things like that. But and I have a presence on Facebook where I talk these things. The two books, and where I talk and who who's interested in it and that sort of thing.
Well, Lieutenant Colonel Harold Knudsen, thank you ever so much for what has been a fascinating, insightful, and candid interview. I personally have thoroughly enjoyed that. And I strongly believe our audience will also. And to our audience, thank you for watching this interview. Please follow Unprecedented TV on the app or on YouTube. Please like it. Please share it. And please leave feedback for both Lieutenant Colonel Knudsen and myself regarding the contents of this interview, because not only does this show approach critical issues from a Christian perspective, but also from a candid perspective. And if there is no candid perspective, there is no free speech. And if there is no free speech, there is no democracy and freedom, contrary to what the powers that be in the Western world would like to think. So again, thank you so much, Lieutenant Colonel, for your time. And we hope to see you again at some point in the future.
Likewise. Hope I can join you again. This is very enjoyable. Thank you.
Thank you, Harold.